It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey, foreign editor, joins us. How are you?
Good, tired, been a busy week.
It's been a busy week. It's not over yet.
No.
All right. Also with us, Mark Dean, journalist at Bloomberg News, who's been watching events on both sides of the channel this week.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Nice to welcome back Matthew Dalton, reporter for the Wall Street Journal.
Hey.
And France24.com's Leila Jacinto coming down from the second floor newsroom to grace us with her presence. How are you?
Good.
The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag World This Week, when Theresa May declared a surprise snap election 6 weeks ago, it looked like it would be a walk in the park. Well, it ended up, as usual, with a drive to Buckingham Palace. But the UK Prime Minister, who's lost her outright Conservative majority in Parliament, edging Labour by only 2 points in the popular vote, and who's trying to keep calm and carry on ahead of what may or may not be her last weekend as Prime Minister.
What the country needs more than ever is certainty. And having secured the largest number of votes and the greatest number of seats in the general election, it is clear that only the Conservative and Unionist Party has the legitimacy and ability to provide that certainty by commanding a majority in the House of Commons.
Mark Dean, a surprising speech after Buckingham Palace. No acknowledgement of the setback that she just suffered.
It is a little bit surprising, but you have to put a good face on it. Keep calm and carry on, as they say. I think that the situation politically is very precarious now. It could go on quite a long time. We just don't know. I don't think you can presume that that May will be out of there anytime soon. She could be, but there doesn't seem to be any challenge really being mounted against her from within the Conservative Party. That suggests for the immediate future, things will carry on.
What was it about her campaign that flopped?
I really think that one of the things that clearly doesn't work anymore, especially with young voters, is authenticity. So this packaged, robotic, political spiel just doesn't go down well, and there's no sincerity in it, and especially young people will not stand for that these days.
Young people who this time turned out to vote, Christopher Dickey.
Well, yeah, that's surprising, I guess, when a lot of young people turn out to vote. But I think a lot of them were turning out for Jeremy Corbyn. I think the same kinds of people were turning out for Corbyn that had turned out for Bernie Sanders, who was supporting Corbyn in the United States. And I think that there's this desire for change. If you look even at the UKIP voters, a lot of them voted for Labour. Because
let's look at the makeup of the parliament. The Conservatives gaining 5.5 points in the popular vote, but Labour upping its total by 10 points. And that seems to be thanks to the collapse of UKIP, whose share of the vote drops to just 2%, Christopher.
Yeah, and I think no seats in parliament. So who are these UKIP voters? They are people who want to throw a wrench into the system, who want to say that the system as it is isn't representing them, isn't answering their needs. They don't really know who will answer their needs, but they want somebody who's really going to shake things up. It's kind of what we saw in the United States with Trump voters or with Bernie Sanders voters, but particularly this group around UKIP. It's not an ideological thing. It's a throw the rascals out thing.
Throw the rascals out thing. And Jeremy Corbyn, who started the campaign as a laughingstock, ran a strong campaign and managed to win over both Remainers from his party in the South and Brexiteers in the North.
Our manifesto for the many, not the few, and I'm very proud of the results that are coming in all over the country tonight of people voting for hope for the future and turning their backs on austerity.
People voting for hope. And this is interesting because there was this feeling when we were listening to the election results returns overnight that Theresa May wasn't the candidate of hope.
Well, I think there was a swell of support. There are some indications that of a swell of support amongst young people against the Brexit position of the government. There seem to be a lot of young people who maybe didn't vote in the referendum.
So this is revenge of the Remainers.
To some extent, there is this attitude, I think, that you were talking about, of people just trying to throw a wrench into the system. But I think young people in the UK overwhelmingly voted against Brexit, and I think that there are a lot of young people though didn't actually come out to vote at all. So when you had more of those people being drawn in, that kind of changed the Brexit. I think Brexit played a role there.
Yeah, the only problem is that the Liberal Democrats ran against Brexit, and they didn't do anything in this election.
You know, I got a sense of Jeremy Corbyn's popularity in Manchester. I mean, it's a northern city. It is a Labour stronghold. But the day after the attacks, I was in the town hall, surrounded by these primarily South kids of Pakistani origin, and Corbyn was at the ceremony. Theresa May wasn't. His support was just overwhelming among the youth. And at the end of the speech, they were all screaming, "Where's May? Where's May?" I think even, the fact that this campaign was supposed to be the Brexit campaign, but then you had two deadly attacks, Manchester and London. And Corbyn's message was consistent, which was, cuts are not going to help. And particularly since Theresa May was the Home Secretary or the Interior Minister, the fact that these attacks happened, she really couldn't play the classic conservative or, center-right card of we are strong on security. She had no grounds for that. And so Corbyn, even when it came to security, amazingly, Labour, got the benefit of that issue as well.
And that harks back to what you said at the outset, which is here's Jeremy Corbyn. He shows up at that debate night. Theresa May doesn't. He mixes that up, mingles with the crowd. It always seemed very scripted and careful.
And there's also a refusal to buy the fear message. I think, people who say, you are trying to tell us, scare us, saying Corbyn can't run the country, saying he can't handle the Brexit negotiations. Well, don't tell us what to think. Don't tell us what to do.
And there's something about Theresa May that seemed just fundamentally undemocratic. I mean, she took the country to the snap poll because she claims that she wanted a clear mandate. She didn't want too much bickering, but that's the role of the opposition, to make it difficult. And then on the campaign trail, she did not seem to want to engage in any sort of discourse. It seemed so high-handed.
Well, but I think, Mark, we were talking before the show, and Mark made an important point about, I think one of the reasons she wanted a big mandate was to sort of marginalize people in her own party who were very hard-line Brexiteers. If she had brought in a lot of new Tories into the parliament, she could have pushed those people aside a bit. That's pretty much what she was saying.
And I think that's really the important point of what's happened since yesterday. She wanted to come into this with a stronger hand to go into negotiations with Brussels, and she's come out with a much weaker hand. Now she has a precarious government that, it might carry on 2 weeks, it might carry on 6 months, who knows, but it's going to be on a knife edge the whole time, and she's going to be very constrained.
Although on the question of Brexit, it seems like this vote seems to be in favor of a soft Brexit and not a hard Brexit.
Yeah, because now we're discovering the name of Arlene Foster.
Yes.
She's the head of the DUP, the Ulster Unionist. Hard on social values, but soft on Brexit.
Democracy is a blunt instrument, and you can't say, it means this for Brexit precisely. Well, you can see what the results mean, but you can't say what the message, the precise message from voters is. So I would be careful of drawing the conclusion about where this is going to lead us in terms of Brexit. Those 40 or so MPs, 40 to 50 hardcore Brexit, that want a hard Brexit MPs in the Tory party, are going to be there and be on top of May and the government and try to drive their own agenda. The question is, how hard will they drive that, and how much willingness they will have to compromise with the DUP?
And the DUP, which at any time can withdraw that support.
Well, if you're going to have a hard Brexit, is that going to mean you're going to close the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland? Well, if that's the case, then the DUP is going to bail out of this coalition. So those are the kinds of issues that are going to come up.
Reactions out of Brussels, we were talking about it with our correspondent. A mix of anxiety. We heard the commissioner in charge of budget, he's German, Mr. Oettinger, tell German radio this morning that he says this adds new uncertainty. and also a little bit of smugness, because there is this sense that Brussels now has the upper hand.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of Schadenfreude going on here from the Germans. I think it remains to be seen, though, how this is going to play out. I think the trade-off has always been free movement or giving up free movement or maintaining access to the single market, and that dynamic probably I don't think that's shifted at all. Certainly, the EU position. They're going to be very firm. That's always going to be a trade-off that the UK has to decide for itself what it wants more of: free movement of labor or access to the single market.
I mean, Jean-Claude Juncker, the head of the European Commission, basically said, bring it on. Let's start these negotiations. Why are we waiting? Let's not wait any longer. There's this sense that really the Europeans, the European Union or the United Europe group is in the catbird seat right now.
Getting back to what you were saying about your reporting from Manchester, did you sense that the attacks, first in Manchester, then in London, were in a way a turning point, or this hope versus despair theme was already playing out?
I would say it was a turning point. In a lot of cities that has an attack, the rallying around the flag moment happened, and I don't know. In the face of this kind of threat, the public reaction has always been, well, there is this threat, but what do? We carry on, and these kind of negative messages of fear are not cutting it that much anymore, because this continent has become, I mean, sorry to say, we're used to it, and we're sort of now in the stage of like, so now what are we going to do about it? Nobody is really frightened by what's happening. They're in a much more pragmatic phase of handling this issue.
And she mentioned Islamist extremism in her speech after going to Buckingham Palace, long before she ever mentioned Brexit, Theresa May.
Well, I think she thinks that may be a strong suit for her, the fight against terrorism and Islamic extremism. But for the reasons that we've already talked about, the fact that she was Home Secretary for, 6 years, and she's the one who was supposed to make Britain safe, and now it is certifiably not so safe. So she says the problem is, and she said this before, a couple of days ago, right after the attack in London, she says the problem is the failure to integrate Muslims into British society, the idea that everybody's living in these separate ghettoized communities, which may be partly true. But that's not going to be reversed anytime soon. And the attempts to try and change that are only going to increase the volatility in British society. So it isn't clear what her real recommendations are, and it starts to sound like racism and scapegoating.
And the other problem here is that her critics might actually have a point that championing budget cuts and austerity under the Tory governments of the past, one could argue that has made the UK more vulnerable.
Corbyn ran a strong campaign and seemed to carry that hope versus despair theme. The Daily Mail, though, sees otherwise. It ran 14 pages of Corbyn bashing. This was on Wednesday, most of the tabloid press against the Labour leader, and yet we've seen the result that we've seen. Does this mean that the all-powerful British tabloids are losing their luster, Matthew?
Well, I think many people know that the readership of these tabloids is getting older. Younger readers tend not to read them, and that may be an indication of, so the older readers, the people who are reading these, they're going to be voting Tory anyway. The younger readers are not reading them, and as the younger readers become more prominent, they're not going to be swayed by that.
My colleagues at Bloomberg View have a story out today saying that one of the losers of the British campaign is the press, and the tabloid press in particular. There was a story out, people have heard about it, about Rupert Murdoch banging his hands on the table in frustration when he found out about the result. So I think that's fair to say.
And the tabloid press has, according to many, become more caustic in the past year than it ever was in the past.
Perhaps that's turned people off. I don't know. I would be careful on the notion that Corbyn ran a strong campaign. He didn't make mistakes. If you look into what you read, I think the reviews of his performance were actually mixed. But when your opponent is making errors, just let your opponent continue, and that's the
Final point on all this. We have seen a splintering of politics all around. Yet one of the surprising things about this vote is suddenly we're back to virtually a two-party system in Britain.
For now. But it wouldn't surprise me to see a movement arise in Britain where people, because you've seen in Britain that there was this movement toward the extremes. The Tories got farther and farther to the right. Certainly Corbyn's very far to the left. There is middle ground open. But the problem is that the Liberal Democrats are not a very credible party. They feel old. They feel out of tune. If you had something like En Marche here in France, where you have somebody come in more or less from the outside and mobilize the center, that could be a very different story. But right now we don't see anybody like that.
And we'll talk about France when we come back. You may not know it. There are legislative elections coming up this weekend in this country. Stay with us. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. So is Mark Dean of Bloomberg News. We're also in the company of Matthew Dalton of the Wall Street Journal and France24.com's Leila Jacinto. The UK may be wondering what to do about a hung parliament. Not so France's new president. Sunday's the first round of legislative elections, and Emmanuel Macron set to clobber all comers with what could be an overwhelming majority, a majority the likes of which, Mark Dean, we won't have seen since the 1960s.
could be quite something. I mean, it's amazing, especially when you consider that between February and May, everyone was saying, "Well, Macron will never have a majority. How will he ever be able to govern?" I mean, well, we'll see. We'll see on Sunday and a week Sunday. These are polls.
What does that tell you about France and sort of the idea that people like a strong leader and give?
I think it does tell you something about France, and it tells you something about political momentum. But it also tells you specifically about what Macron has managed to do, with what you can do with a centrist party in a two-round system. So why is this going to happen? Because, first of all, Macron's support is fairly well spread across the country. So that means that in most constituencies, he's going to get his candidate through. And once a candidate is through, suppose in any given constituency, a socialist and Macron's candidate makes it through. Well, everyone on the right is going to say, well, you know, we don't want the socialist in, so we're going to vote for the centrist. And the same is going to happen on the other side if it's the Macron party against the right wing, and the socialists will all rally behind what the French call reserve. There's a lot of reserves of votes to come to Macron, and that's why the party is going to do so well.
Britain has a first past the post system, Matthew Dalton. In France, it's a little bit different. It's a two-round system, and it really does favor this brand new party that didn't even exist a few weeks ago.
Well, it's remarkable to think, just to take a step back and think about what's happened. Emmanuel Macron, a year ago, he was a complete underdog, largely unknown outside of France, not at all a leading politician in France. And now he is completely, he stands astride, sits atop French politics. He's going to be have the biggest party, likely have the biggest party in the legislative election. And what he's doing is he's bringing in all these political newcomers. You know, half of these people have no political background, and that's one of the criteria that he wanted. What he's doing is he's ushering in a whole new political class into France, and it's a remarkable moment.
A new political class, Christopher Dickey, because he seems to know where the bodies are buried. If you want to get the civil service and the high civil service on your side.
Well, look, I mean, this is the anarchy. This is the École Nationale d'Administration, the most elite school of civil service. That's produced a lot of presidents of France. It produced Macron. It produced a lot of the people around him. This is not an anti-establishment center. This is the establishment that is taking over, but it has presented itself as a fresh look at that establishment rather than the very tired socialist, Gaullist parties that existed before. And, and he's played it brilliantly. He used foreign meetings with foreign leaders, with Trump and with Putin, to present himself as a very tough leader in a way that the French really liked. I mean, the guy who cuts my hair, or my hairs, was telling me the other day, and he was a Fillon supporter. He says, God, Macron, we were talking about his meeting with Putin. He says, this guy, il a des grosses couilles, hein?
It's a family show, don't translate. Lila Jacinto, do you feel Macron mania when you walk the streets of Paris?
Yes, on the streets of Paris, no, I'd say, the French are very adept at showing not overt enthusiasm. I see much more enthusiasm internationally among my friends across the world, just captivated by Macron. And, he makes these statements in English. Hollande, a lot of people during his presidency wanted to know, they would forget the French president's name. And right now, Macron seems to be up there with Justin Trudeau in cute status. And of course, his handshake with Trump, his standing up to Putin. For someone as young as this, to take on an experienced leader like Putin with a former KGB guy who is so intimidating in face-to-face meetings, that kind of thing is really remarkable.
If I may, I don't know if you feel this, but I feel that the French are just happier now.
Yes.
They may not love Macron, but they feel better about themselves now.
They're
than
less
they
in a
did.
bad mood, you mean?
Huh?
They're not in as much of a bad mood. Wait, I'm joking.
Well, okay.
I'll
Take what I can get.
I have to say it's true. The man in the Elysee does set a national mood.
All right, the honeymoon is still very much on when it comes to France's president. In the United States, well, it's long over, or maybe it never was. In fact, we had this Thursday the former director of the FBI calling the president of the United States a liar and much more. FBI Director James Comey former FBI Director James Comey telling a Senate panel that Trump pressured him to drop the investigation into then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's ties to Russia. 9 conversations between Comey and Trump, including one on February 14th, where the president took Comey aside.
I just remembered sitting here, a third one. When you've seen the picture of me walking across the blue room, and what the president whispered in my ear was, I really look forward to working with you. The next Friday I have dinner, and the president begins by wanting to talk about my job. And so I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute, 3 times you've already asked me to stay or talked about me staying. My common sense, again, I could be wrong, but my common sense told me what's going on here is that he's looking to get something in exchange for granting my request to stay in the job.
All right. There was no smoking gun, say Republicans, during those hearings. But Christopher Dickey, what did you learn?
Well, I watched the entire hearing, and I think a lot of the press is missing the point. We had an article in the Daily Beast about it today. But I think if you really listen to what Comey is saying, it's not about the minutia of, I hope that you drop the thing with Flynn, or these kind of legalistic points. We started out the hearing with questions about whether Russia was attacking the United States. Comey was unequivocal on this question. Russia has attacked the United States. It's tried to destroy our electoral system. It has used all kinds of offensive measures against the United States. And nobody in the intelligence community in the United States doubts that. Then he called the president a liar for a number of things that the president had said about him and about the FBI, because he said he felt the FBI was under attack. What he didn't say explicitly was that he thinks the president is a traitor. But that was implicit in what he was saying, because he said the president didn't care that the United States was under attack. He was asked specifically, did the president ever say, I want to talk to you about what we can do about the Russian attacks on the United States? And he looked at the questioner and said no.
A traitor or in over his head? Because that was sort of the implication.
No, I think that's
listening
a little.
to the Speaker
Look, the
of the
guy
House,
is the president. The guy is the president of the United States. On-the-job training for the president of the United States, that's a bit much to expect. And the kinds of excuses that are made for President Trump or Donald Trump again and again are, he's learning while doing. Well, he's screwing up while doing, and he's screwing up really badly. And if we were running a corporation, he'd be out of there. He'd be fired. The only thing that's keeping him in office is that the Republicans are pushing through their very narrow-minded platform, and they figure as getting rid of him will compromise that effort at this point.
Matthew Dalton?
I mean, one of the things that the Republicans and President Trump also tweeted this morning about that they took away from the hearing was that Comey said publicly that President Trump was not under investigation. However, I think any reasonable person can look at this investigation. They can note that a number of Trump's campaign associates are all under investigation. The question of whether Trump himself is under investigation or what Trump himself did in conjunction with these people is inevitably going to come up in the investigation. So the fact that Comey said that he was, at least when he was FBI director, at that moment, not under investigation, is kind of cold comfort to Trump, because it's a legalist, a very legalistic,
and because Trump almost certainly
hairs.
is under investigation now.
Well, there's
nobody is going to say that publicly, but that's exactly what the special counsel has to look at, is the question of obstruction of justice.
Donald Trump silent on the day, but this Friday he was back at it using his weapon of choice, Twitter, saying, despite so many false statements and lies, total and complete vindication. And wow, Comey is a leaker. What do you make of all this, Mark?
Look, I mean, every statement of Trump, and in fact, every statement on social media only has as much value as the characters in there. And, what Chris was saying is right. Everything, we have to keep our eyes on the big picture here. And what does the big picture of what Trump does tell you? It tells you that he systematically lies, that he doesn't take care to, of the things that you want your president to take care of. And that's a concern. And similarly, it's so easy to get caught up in the legalistic, technical issues of did this and this or that happen. It gets ridiculous. Keep your eye on the politics. And I think, the problem in all of this is that whether Trump stays or goes will be political. The Republicans are simply not on board for getting rid of Trump right now, so he's not going to go. And the question is, what happens next?
The question is, what happens next? We're seeing statements coming out of Washington calling on Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states to ease their blockade of Qatar. Now, you must be wondering what this has to do with it. Well, perhaps a lot, because many are wondering, did Donald Trump's recent trip to Saudi Arabia unwittingly trigger a fresh crisis in the Middle East this week? Saudi Arabia and the UAE leading a group of nations blockading Qatar, sparking panic buying in supermarkets, grounding flights barred from the airspace of neighboring states. Qatar even kicked out of the Saudi-led coalition fighting Iran-aligned militias in Yemen, and with Doha developing joint gas projects with Iran, supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Did the Saudis interpret Trump's support when he visited as a green light to put the squeeze on Qatar? Leila Jacinto.
If you ask my opinion, I'd say yes. When Trump did his sword dance in Saudi Arabia, he was essentially giving them a chance to saber rattle. Nobody expected it to go right up to this level, and what is happening here? What's happening here is Saudi Arabia and Egypt are taking it out on Qatar. There's, Barack Obama is not in office like that because Qatar backs the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood is an Islamist party, but they contest the election. So, this is a matter of the pot calling the kettle black. To answer your question about Trump, yes, of course, Trump's message to Saudi Arabia definitely gave them the green light. They've been having this problem with little Qatar, extending and flexing its muscles, but not to the extent that where we are going to. And the economic ramifications of these sanctions are enormous.
And we're a little confused by all this because Trump this week, again, after all this broke out, tweeted his support for Saudi Arabia and the likes. And now we have the U.S. Secretary of State, again, calling on Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt to ease their blockade. So it sounds like the State Department and the White House are not on the same page.
Well, I think it seems like a lot of the government and Donald Trump, and it's not just, the White House and the rest of the government. I think it's Donald Trump himself and the rest of the government are not on the same page. I mean, he conducts diplomacy over Twitter. often without consulting any aides, without consulting the State Department bureaucracy, without consulting other federal agencies. And that's, to one reason why this mess has arisen. And it's also worth noting that Qatar is one of the United States' most staunch allies in the region. They have a major military base in Qatar. Why on earth would he want to be jeopardizing that relationship right now? It's very.
He didn't see an orb in Qatar.
Yeah,
He's just enamored by the Saudi
look,
kitsch.
this is all part of the remedial education of the President of the United States, which is a very sad spectacle and a very dangerous spectacle, particularly when you're talking about the Middle East. There are more than 10,000 American troops in Qatar. It is the forward base for CENTCOM, the Central Command. All of the flights in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan are coordinated out of Qatar. To all of a sudden have the President of the United States saying, aha, those Saudis, they told us that Qatar was a bad country.
The week, by the way, the week that the offensive on Raqqa has begun.
It has begun. So all of that, and there's no sense of historical background. There's no realization that the greatest offense that Qatar has made against the Saudis was to create the Al Jazeera Arabic television network.
So who should the Saudis be listening to, Donald Trump or Rex Tillerson?
They will listen to Trump. Because Mohammed bin Salman, people barely noticed this because it happened at a time when we were looking for Angela Merkel to meet with Trump, and then there was bad weather. She didn't come. She came a little late. Who moved in there? Mohammed bin Salman went and had a tete-a-tete with Trump in March. It got very little coverage, but Mohammed bin Salman, he's the son of the king of Saudi Arabia, and he's the driving force, not just in the government of Saudi Arabia, but in its wars. The war in Yemen, the squeezing of Qatar. And he's the one who gave an interview just last month saying, we want to take the war to Iran. We don't want the war to happen here in Saudi Arabia. Well, Jesus Christ. We're basically we're the dog. The U.S. is the dog that's going to be wagged by Mohammed bin Salman's tail.
It's just the latest example of the dangerous of the danger of this inconsistency. People don't know exactly what the American government thinks, and the American government is there essentially to.
Yeah, because we had a guest when we discussed it in our debate program earlier this week, who said, Mark Dean, that look at the price of oil. Price of oil is going down. People know this is just sound and fury.
People know, or they don't know, or they choose to ignore, or they believe what they want to believe. That's a very human trait. And this is, as I say, it's just the latest example, and it can get a lot worse.
But I mean, when you have bin Salman, who is extremely young, not experienced, and has these very important dossiers, saying, this fiery rhetoric like that, and then you have an ISIS attack in Iran, then of course, when you have, Ayatollah Sistani or the Iranian Revolutionary Guard saying that the Saudis were responsible for this attack, you go back and you play the tape with the Saudis saying that the fight will go into Iran. And of course, a lot of Iranians believe this.
I think Americans and maybe Europeans are really not aware of it. We are on the brink of an abyss here. We are on the brink of a possible big shooting war in the Middle East, much bigger than any that we're seeing so far. And it will implicate the United States.
All right, and then there's this strange occurrence we saw on Thursday. The Saudi football team refusing to observe a minute of silence at a World Cup qualifier in Australia for victims of last weekend's London attacks. The official explanation there, you see that most of the Saudi players went and instead continued training. One player lined up. The official explanation was that it's not a Saudi custom to observe a minute of silence, an excuse that's since been debunked. What do you make of that, Leela? Matthew Dalton, go ahead.
Well, I think it just highlights the, if Trump is concerned about states that support terrorism and support extremism, not that the Saudi state itself is supporting terrorism necessarily, but the Saudi groups are supporting extremist groups and extremist views of Islam. That choosing the Saudi side in the this Middle East debate that's going on is a very strange thing for Trump to be doing. I mean, Saudi groups, wealthy Saudis, have been known for a long time to be exporting a very austere and extreme version of Islam around the world. Qatar, if anything, has been serving as a kind of moderating influence in the Sunni world. By some extent, they're closer to Iran. They too have been supporting extremist groups. But between the two nations, why you would choose the Saudi side over the Qatari side is strange.
17 killed, by the way, speaking of Iran, in unprecedented attacks on parliament and Ayatollah Khomeini's shrine this week. The attackers identified as Iranian nationals who had joined ISIS and fought in Syria and Iraq. What's your reading into what happened?
Well, Iran has been a beacon of stability, but, in a way, this was sort of waiting to happen because there are Sunnis in Iran, and youngsters all over, they could be swayed by the Islamic State group. So, and the choice of targets was also very symbolic. I mean, they were really the pillars of the Islamic Revolution. Khomeini's gravesite, which is a massive complex, and the parliament, which, when we are talking about democracy in the Middle East, Iran has a flawed democracy, but it is definitely more democratic than Saudi Arabia.
Or Qatar.
This is true. So, this is a very dangerous phase. But in terms of, I think, how the Iranians will react to this, I think, we will have a rallying around the flag, of course. There are going to be the funerals of the victims. And I think Iranians are going to rally around. This may probably make the Revolutionary Guard stronger. And, Rouhani and his perennial domestic battle may lose some ground because he's reaching out to the West. But in the long run, we've crossed a milestone with this attack in Iran.
All right, Leila Jacinto, I want to thank you. I want to thank Mark Dean, Matthew Dalton, and I also want to thank Christopher Dickey. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James. Emma, beware of pollsters predicting a landslide win.
Absolutely. Well, the pollsters were saying that the gap was closing, and so it wasn't.
I noticed the margins got wider and wider.
Yes, some of the polls had them very, very close indeed. At one point, just a 1% difference between the two. And everyone's laughing at the sight of this cartoon, which was created by Dave Brown, his version of the hung parliament, and of course the very well-known kind of statement necklace of Theresa May hanging in the foreground there. And certainly, although the pollsters were predicting it was going to be a closer race than maybe had been expected, it still came as a real shock when those exit polls came out late on last night. A lot of people really reeling from the surprise of it. This is another cartoon from Ben Jennings, which has Larry the cat, the mouser-in-chief at number 10 Downing Street, standing guard over the door. And I think really that was the sort of question mark over who would be entering the door of number 10, because there was a possibility that would she have to stand down? Would the party rebel against her? Could Jeremy Corbyn even form a coalition of sorts? But as we now know, of course, that isn't the case. Larry the cat, or at least the Twitter account in his name, has been magnificently trolling Theresa May today, including this one, a visual representation of Theresa May's current strategy. It's been fairly relentless from Larry the cat. This is another one. So no coalition of chaos, but we do get a minority of mayhem. Lots of people seem to like that one.
It's a good alliteration.
Absolutely. And the former England footballer Gary Lineker, not normally known for his political views, says, I think Theresa May has won own goal of the season. Thousands of people retweeting that one. And as for the British eccentrics, there is always something to be laughed at and amused by when it comes to the rather curious characters that stand for election. This was the scene in Maidenhead. On the left-hand side is Theresa May. Along with her, you've got a gentleman dressed as Elmo from Sesame Street, and Lord Buckethead taking centre stage there. And also Howling Lord Hope, the strange gentleman there, sort of the successor, if you will, to Screaming Lord Sutch of the Monster Raving Loony Party. Lord Buckethead has been tweeting a lot today. He's very pleased that he's managed to get himself right next to the main woman.
Those are the number
hour.
of votes he got? 200?
He got 249 votes.
Okay.
He describes himself as an intergalactic Star Lord and true champion of democracy. So there you go. And he's been very pleased with his very high-profile appearances during the election coverage. Paddy Power, which is a betting shop, says, when your name's Lord Buckethead, you have a bucket on your head and you're not the most embarrassed one in the photo. Because, of course, this really has been a slap in the face for Theresa May, and lots of people commenting on that kind of subject. This Twitter user pointing out that it's nice of Theresa to wear her Trump outfit on the same night that she destroyed her political career. Because, of course, that was the moment where she actually took the hand of Donald Trump, or he took hers, whichever way round it happened. And a lot of people, I think it's fair to say, in the United Kingdom lost some respect for her at that particular moment in time. She chose to wear that very same outfit last night as she won her seat, obviously, but had a very difficult day at the office. In the interests of political balance, though, there have been some rather unfortunate moments for Jeremy Corbyn, too. This was a high five that went horribly, horribly wrong. Emily Thornberry, who is actually Shadow Foreign Secretary, was the recipient of a high boob, I suppose you might call it, because she moved her hand at the most unfortunate moment. This spoof account for the Queen of England says Mr Corbyn seems to have taken a leaf out of President Trump's book when it comes to greeting women. And she's also been politically impartial, mocking Theresa May too, saying that she had a text from her saying, just checking, ma'am, but it's too late to cancel the election, isn't it?
All right, the general election, which I'm sure she wished she'd cancelled.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people drawing attention to this particular tweet from her just a few days ago. If I lose just 6 seats, I will lose this election and Jeremy Corbyn will be sitting down to negotiate with Europe. It's something that she didn't just tweet, she actually said repeatedly, as Channel 4 News has been flagging up today too. And of course, she lost many more than just those 6 seats. Ed Miliband, the Labour leader who lost out back in 2015, says, we know Theresa May can't now negotiate Brexit for Britain because she told us losing the majority would destroy her authority, and it has. Now, in addition to that, a lot of people questioning her, climbing into bed, if you like, with the DUP. Among them, James O'Brien, a British broadcaster who's something of a firebrand, who said, if Jeremy Corbyn is a terrorist sympathiser, of course, the words that we've seen many times over, especially in the right-wing newspapers in the UK, then what will Theresa May be called when she joins with the DUP? It is causing a lot of controversy and consternation. This Twitter user says, to be fair, Theresa May warned of a coalition of chaos propped up by extremist terrorist sympathisers. She just didn't say she'd be the one leading it.
Oh, dear. Well, the gulf between those in power and those in opposition seems to be growing yet again after this poll. Emma James, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.